My name is Adrian Vale, or it was. One moment, a plane crash over the Atlantic. The next, this. A jeering crowd, a false accusation, and a face I knew even from my past life. They called me a coward, stripped my title. Crown Prince Lysander, my brother, reveled in it, and, beside him, Duke Valerius Thorn, whose ambition always tasted of poison. Then the captain of the royal guard, Rorik, grabbed me. His grip was steel, his face a mask of duty. 7 days, the herald had screamed. 7 days until my execution. They threw me into a cell. Stone walls, damp air, iron bars. My body ached, but my mind, Adrian Vale's mind, was already at work. This wasn't a prison, it was a new game board. 7 days. A death sentence, they thought. But to me, it was a deadline. A challenge. The first constraint in a problem I had to solve, just like any market manipulation. Every man has a price, a fear, or an ambition. Find it, and their will becomes yours. Even a simple guard walking his rounds was a data point, a potential lever, cadence of their footsteps, the timing of their patrols, the way the torchlight flickered on the far wall. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle. I just needed to assemble it. They think they're hunting me. They don't realize I've already set the trap. This world, with its kings and dupes, was just another market, and I was still the chess master. A guard's whistle, a distinct pattern, 3 short blasts, then 2 long, not random, a shift change, or a signal. Either way, it was information, and information was power. Each observation, each tiny piece of intel was a thread. I would weave them into a net, not to escape, but to catch my enemies. The true purpose of this prison was already changing. The heavy iron chains still bound my wrists and ankles, a constant reminder of my physical weakness. But my mind, that was free. That was my true weapon. They gave me 7 days. 7 days until my public execution. I shook his hand and smiled. He had no idea what I just set in motion. 6 days. I watched the torchlight flicker on the cell wall, listening to the guard's footsteps. They thought they had broken me. They were wrong. A guard approached, a junior one. He slid a bowl of watery gruel through the slot, my daily ration. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was young, newer, didn't carry the weight of the others, a flicker of pity, or perhaps just a desire to get through his shift without incident. A weakness, waited for his next patrol. When he returned, I spoke, my voice barely a whisper. Just a little more water, I asked. Please. He returned with a full flask. A small victory. It confirmed his humanity, and more importantly, his willingness to bend the rules for a quiet life. My turn to push. At the next meal, I pushed. The gruel, it's hard to keep down. I paused. A little bread, perhaps? A small mercy for my last days? He returned. Not just bread, but a small piece of dried meat. My first real meal in days. The junior guard was officially compromised. Now for the real test. I've always found comfort in books, I told him, my voice weak. Perhaps in old history, to pass the days. Master Kale's works, if possible. He hesitated, then glanced down the empty corridor. I can try, a small, almost tiny nod. The prison's information flow, I realized, was already compromised. Hours later, he returned. A tattered book tucked under his arm. It was in the old archives, he mumbled. Not exactly forbidden, but he left the sentence unfinished. The book was old, its pages brittle. A history of the Ashford lineage and notable houses by Master K.L. Exactly what I needed. Every word a potential weapon. Then, on a page detailing ancient alliances, a small, almost tiny symbol, a forgotten mark. A secret society. I traced it with my finger. I needed to get a message out. The forgotten symbol in the dusty book. It wasn't just a glyph, it was a key. A specific, almost childish drawing only a few people would recognize, linking me to the outside. RGA Tremators, the symbol was only half the puzzle. I needed a hand to move it. Someone overlooked, easily dismissed, and, ideally, already holding a quiet resentment. The guard shift change was always a moment of relaxed vigilance. A brief window where attention drifted, a perfect opportunity for a coincidence to occur. I needed a message that was both innocent and undeniably mine. Something only Serafina would recognize as a coded plea, a request for an item that held a forgotten meaning. The nervous servant approached, bucket clanking. One of the new guards, too busy boasting, bumped into his comrade. The perfect storm was brewing. A misplaced foot, a loud boast, and the bucket went flying. Water splashed, guards cursed, the perfect moment precisely as I'd calculated. In the confusion, the servant's eyes met mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw his fear, then a flicker of old loyalty. My hand moved, a discarded scrap of paper falling near his foot. He snatched it up. No one saw. The guards were too busy complaining about the mess. My first move was complete. The chess piece was in play. Later, alone in the servants' quarters, the young man pulled out the folded paper. His hands trembled. A message from the condemned prince could mean his own death. He remembered the prince's quiet kindness years ago, a small gesture no one else saw. Fear warred with a desperate flicker of hope. He knew who this message was truly for. The message found its way to Lady Seraphina. She was the one Adrian had hoped for, the one who would understand the words hidden between the lines. Her eyes scanned the words, retrieve the forgotten quill from the North Tower study, an impossible request, yet she understood. Adrian wasn't broken, he was plain. Adrian hadn't asked for an item. He'd given me a riddle, a series of seemingly random words that only made sense if you knew how his mind worked. He wasn't asking for a forgotten trinket. He was asking for a name, a contact, someone who could find the things no one else wanted found. It was a risk, leaving the safety of my home. But Adrian needed me, and I had to choose carefully what I would wear, who I would become. The carriage ride was a blur. The city's scent changed, growing sharper, less refined. This was not the Silverwood I knew, but the one Adrian had always seen. Finding an information broker wasn't about asking directly. It was about asking the right questions to the right people without revealing too much. The directions were vague, a sequence of alleyways and forgotten doorways. It was a test, I realized, a test to see if I truly belonged. The room was simple, practical, and then I saw her. Alara, her eyes held the cynicism of 1,000 secrets, but also a flicker of something else. Curiosity. I told her Adrian needed someone to track a forgotten coin, making it sound like a simple errand. Her eyes narrowed. She knew better. Alara named her price. It was exorbitant, a clear test of my commitment. She wanted to see if I was truly desperate or simply playing a game. Alara picked up the pouch, testing its weight. A slow smile spread across her face. My commitment, or perhaps my desperation, had been proven. I gave her the coin. A simple copper piece, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. The first thread, I thought, in the web Adrian was spinning. Alara smirked, turning the coin in her fingers. A fool's errand, she thought. Easy gold. She had no idea she'd just picked up the first thread of a king's game. The coin felt small, almost tiny in Alara's palm, just a piece of copper. But Adrian's request had been specific, and I was getting paid. Merchants were creatures of habit. If you knew where to look, their secrets were always recorded. A minor ledger in a dusty back room held what I needed. The ledger showed a discrepancy. Small, barely a rounding error. But it was there, and it was tied to House Thorn. I reported it, just as I'd been asked. Seraphina's visit was a lifeline. More than that, it was my eyes and ears. She passed me the parchment, a quick, almost tiny exchange. The parchment was brief. A ledger entry, a small sum, a merchant's name. Tiny, Alara called it. But I saw the pattern, the thread leading back to Thorn. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. A tiny crack in Thorn's fortress of lies. He thought it was impenetrable. He was wrong. I almost smiled. The next move was clear. Thorn had vulnerabilities, not just financial. A rumor, publicly dismissed, was often the truth they wanted buried most. I wrote my next instruction. Seraphina returned, as expected. The new message was longer, more detailed. She didn't question it, she just understood. My game was escalating. Alara listened, less cynical this time. The rumors I wanted her to track was specific. It had been publicly dismissed, of course. That always made it more interesting. Alara moved through the city's underbelly like a phantom. This wasn't about ledgers anymore. This was about whispers, grudges, and the secrets people paid to keep buried. And she was good at digging. The rumor was true. A land dispute, a minor noble, a quiet arrangement with Thorn. All dismissed as gossip, all real, and now all exposed. My first piece of leverage. Adrian hadn't guessed. He'd known. The coin, the ledger, the rumor, all pieces of a puzzle only he could see. I shook my head. He was playing a different game entirely. The proof was solid. A forged deed, a coerced signature. Alara held it, her eyes tracing the details, and I knew she understood. This wasn't just a rumor. Seraphina's face was a mask of concern, but her grip on the small, folded note was firm. She passed it to me through the bars, a brief, almost tiny exchange. The note confirmed it all. Duke Thorn's scheme, Lord Valen's dirty hands. This wasn't just leverage, it was the first domino. I knew exactly where to aim it. My instructions were simple: leak it, anonymously, directly to the Grand Council. Seraphina's eyes widened. She knew this was a dangerous step, but she didn't question it. Alara worked with a quiet efficiency, her hands moving over the documents. She understood the importance of untraceability. Every detail, every mark would be scrubbed clean. Ret. The shadows of the Grand Council building were deep, perfect for a ghost. A small package, no bigger than my hand, disappeared into the night. My first move was complete. The next morning, a junior clerk, sorting through the night's deliveries, found the package. He opened it, curiosity piqued, and his eyes flew wide. The game had begun. The whispers began subtle, then grew into a roar. Lord Valen, corruption, land dispute. The name of Duke Thorne's ally was on everyone's lips, carried by the morning breeze. Lysander dismissed it as a minor inconvenience, but I could almost hear the frustration in his voice. Thorne, I knew, would be far more calculating. He wouldn't show weakness. They tried to downplay it, to dismiss Lord Valen as a rogue element. Their forced smiles, the subtle tension in their shoulders, it was all the proof I needed. Their facade was cracking. From my cell, the distant clamor of the city was a symphony. The scandal was spreading. My enemies were reacting. It was a small victory, but the taste of it was undeniably sweet. 2 days. The execution was 2 days away. My enemies were distracted, but the clock was still ticking. The real game had just begun. The royal decree was posted declaring Lord Valen a traitor. Lysander and Thorne moved fast, disavowing him to protect their own reputations, just as I knew they would. Lysander's focus was always on appearances. He ordered Rorik to ensure the public understood Valen's betrayal was his alone, a clear message. Thorne, however, was less concerned with public opinion than with his own secrets. He ordered his guards to fortify his study, sealing off his ledgers. A predictable move. Dungeon walls couldn't hide the whispers. Lysander's public disavowal, Thorne's panicked security, it was all unfolding as I'd anticipated. Leverage built through their own fear. I needed to push the narrative. A new message for Seraphina, subtle enough to bypass scrutiny, potent enough to shift perception. The next move was crucial. Seraphina met Alara in their usual spot. No words were exchanged, just the quick transfer of the folded note. Trust was a rare commodity, and Seraphina had earned mine. Ilara's instructions were simple. Spread the word that Valen was a scapegoat, that Thorne's involvement ran deeper. A subtle poison, easily dismissed, impossible to ignore. The whispers reached Thorne. He dismissed them publicly, of course, but privately his paranoia grew. He ordered more guards, specifically around his private study. Foolish. Alara observed the new patrols, not just general security, but specific, focused on the study, on that hidden vault. Thorne had just shown me exactly where to look. Next morning, Alara had her report. Not just a location, but a weakness. Thorne's hidden vault. Exactly what I needed. The game was accelerating. Seraphina's quiet report was precise. The vault was hidden in Thorne's study behind a false panel. She described the new guard patrols, the frequency. All the pieces were there. Thorne's hidden document in a vault within his heavily guarded study. Retrieving it seemed impossible, especially with my execution set for tomorrow. I just smiled. The impossible was merely a chess problem. The blueprint for my freedom was complete. Every piece, every move accounted for. They thought they had me cornered, but the game was just beginning. Seraphina returned, her face a mask of worry. I gave her the message, each word a command, a precise instruction for an impossible task. She didn't hesitate. Seraphina found Alara in the merchant district. My words, filtered through her, became a challenge Alara couldn't resist. The stakes were clear, the reward implied. Alara moved with ruthless efficiency. A forgotten torch, a carelessly placed barrel, a whispered rumor about a ghost in the West Wing. Small things, perfectly timed. The ghost rumor quickly spread. Captain Rorik, ever dutiful, ordered a contingent of guards to sweep the West Wing. Just as I predicted, the first piece had moved. Meanwhile, Seraphina arrived at Thorne's estate. Her innocent errands was a carefully crafted inconvenience, designed to consume his attention for a crucial window of time. Thorne, ever concerned with appearances, greeted Seraphina with feigned courtesy. He was trapped, obligated to entertain her, his attention diverted exactly as I needed. With guards diverted and Thorne occupied, the path was clear. Alara moved like a phantom, her hooded figure merging with the encroaching twilight, heading straight for Thorne's private study. The study was heavily guarded, but the diversions had left openings. Alara slipped past the remaining patrols, a whisper of movement, a breath held too long. Every shadow was an ally. Inside, Thorne's study was a maze of books and ledgers, but I knew where to look. Behind a loose panel, a hidden compartment, and inside, the document, the proof I needed. Contain pour hour was built. The parchment was mine, the first key to unlocking this kingdom's corruption. Alara secured it, her mission complete. Now, the escape, and then the final move. Night had fully fallen. Alara was out, the document secured. Tomorrow, the scaffold awaited me. Tonight, she carried the weight of my entire game. Failure was not an option. The shadows embraced Alara. Thorne's estate loomed, its stone walls cold and indifferent. My plan, months in the making, now rested entirely on her slender shoulders. Guard, lantern swinging, paused at the main gate. Alara had only seconds to clear the perimeter. Every step was a calculation, every shadow a potential ally. Inside, the halls were a maze of tapestries and polished stone. Alara moved like a phantom, her training honed by years in Silverwood's forgotten alleys. Thorn's study was where he kept his most protected secrets. I knew the layout, the precise location of the hidden compartment. Ilara just had to find the route. The lock was old but intricate, a relic of Thorn's paranoia. For Alara, it was just another puzzle, but time was a luxury we no longer had. Inside, the study was exactly as I had pictured. Rich wood, heavy tomes, and the hidden vault disguised as a bookshelf. My memory of this world was perfect. The compartment sprang open, revealing a single rolled parchment. This was it, the signed confession, the evidence I needed to change everything. With the document secured, Ilara melted back into the night. Her mission was complete. Now, the real game could begin. Back in my cell, the silence was heavy. I had reviewed every variable, every contingency. My freedom, my life, depended on the next few hours. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the drama about to unfold. They expected a spectacle, a prince's demise. I would give them a revolution. A heavy clang. The cell door opened. Dawn had arrived. My execution day, I stood ready for the performance to begin. Captain Rorik met my gaze. He saw a condemned man. I saw a pawn. My faint smirk was for him, and for the entire kingdom about to witness my opening move. Orfar. The morning sun was a cold mockery. I stood on the scaffold, the roar of the crowd a physical weight. They wanted a show. I would give them one. Lysander watched from his balcony, a triumphant smile on his face. Beside him, Thorn preened. They believed this was their victory. Rorik, the dutiful dog, stood ready. My gaze swept the crowd, lingering for just an instant. A flicker, the slightest nod, it was enough. The signal was sent. Through the throng of faces, Seraphina caught it. My signal. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, a silent confirmation. She moved. Not just any council member. I needed someone impartial, whose integrity was beyond question. Seraphina knew exactly who to find. The old council member unfolded the document. His eyes widened, then narrowed. The confession was undeniable. The truth was out. While the council member absorbed the truth, I spoke. My voice, clear and steady, cut through the jeers. Lysander and Thorn, traitors to the crown. Cowed, confused by my words, started to murmur. The whispers I'd planted began to bloom, merging with the shock of the council members' discovery. Doubt spread like wildfire. On the balcony, their smugness evaporated. Lysander's face twisted in disbelief. Thorn's jowls quivered. My words, combined with the visible parchment, had shattered their illusion. The council member's voice boomed across the square. Halt the execution by order of the Grand Council. Rorik froze, axe poised. The game had stopped. General Theron, observing from a side platform, watched it all. His steel-gray eyes, usually so stern, held a flicker of something new. Respect? Doubt? I had his attention now. They cut my bonds. My life was spared, but I was not free. Lysander and Thorn, however, were no longer the hunters. The public inquiry began now. The real game. They had halted the execution, but my freedom was still conditional. Rorik's guards led me away from the scaffold, the crowd's murmurs following us like a tide. The Grand Council chamber was packed, not with citizens, but with nobles eager to witness the downfall of a prince, or perhaps the downfall of the crown prince. They brought me in, still under guard, to a small, isolated platform. Lysander met my gaze across the room, his eyes burning with a desperate fury. Thorn began his defense, a practiced performance of outrage and anger. He spoke of my treachery, painting me as a cowardly betrayer. The council listened, unblinking. Then, a brief recess. I saw her, a flash of lavender silk in the crowd. They allowed her a short, supervised visit. This was my window. I gave her the precise sequence, the exact words to use. Not to accuse, but to simply present the truth. They would condemn themselves. The inquiry resumed. Seraphina took the stand, no longer timid. She held the signed confession, a simple piece of parchment, but its weight was immense. She detailed the confession, not with anger, but with quiet, devastating logic. The dates, the forged signatures, the specific land deals. Thorn's face went pale. Lysander tried to interrupt, to dismiss her. But Seraphina, remembering my words, simply presented the counter-evidence, a ledger entry, impossible to refute. The chamber erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. The council members, once stoic, now openly debated. The tide had turned. My strategy was working. The lead counselor struck his gavel. The inquiry was adjourned for the day. I was led back to my chambers, a prisoner still, but one whose truth had been heard. Lysander and Thorn, defeated for the day, stood in the emptying chamber, knowing I had just turned their own game against them. But their story wasn't over. Not yet. The Grand Council chamber was almost empty, but Lysander and Thorn remained, their faces a mask of building fury. They knew I had outmaneuvered them. Toward Axamine, the next hour felt like an eternity. I waited in the antechamber, listening to the muffled voices from the council hall. My fate and theirs hung in the balance. The heavy door finally opened. Rorik stood there, rigid as ever, but his gaze was different. He told me the council was ready. The chief counselor's voice cut through the silence. He declared me innocent. The words were simple, but their weight was immense. Then came the judgment for Lysander and Thorn. Not imprisonment, but a public stripping of their titles. Their faces twisted, raw with humiliation. It was a partial victory. Then came my turn. The council offered to restore my princely rights, but I had a different request, one that would baffle them all. I asked for exile, a quiet, forgotten estate far from the capital. The council looked stunned. Lysander and Thorn just stared, utterly bewildered. Later, Serafina found me. I gave her a small, knowing nod. She smiled back, a silent nod that she understood my game. I walked out of the royal palace for the first time in weeks. The guards were few, the crowd confused. Their pity was a useful cloak. The carriage rattled away from Silverwood, leaving the city's splendor behind. The landscape grew wilder, the roads less maintained. My destination was truly forgotten. Night fell. Finally, a crumbling stone wall appeared through the trees. My new base, isolated, forgotten, and perfect. I stepped out, breathing the cold night air. The court thought they'd exiled me. They had no idea what I'd truly set in motion. The carriage rumbled away, leaving me alone at the estate gates, desolate, forgotten. But I saw something else entirely, a blank canvas, waiting for my hand. Inside, dust coated everything. But the library, it was vast, perfect. No one would question a disgraced prince seeking solace among forgotten books. An old caretaker, Elwyn, appeared. I told him my plan, the library, restore it. It will be my life's work now. He just nodded, his eyes weary. Days passed. The library slowly cleared. I asked Elwyn about scholars, local historians. He mentioned the name, almost an afterthought, Master Kael. Reclusive, they say, knows everything. Directions to Kael's dwelling were vague, almost intentionally. A small cottage, nestled deep in the old forest bordering the estate, far from prying eyes. Perfect. The cottage was humble, almost swallowed by the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney. I wondered if he was expecting anyone. Probably not. The door creaked open. Master Kael, his eyes though old, held a piercing intelligence. He looked at me, a disgraced prince, with not an ounce of surprise. I introduced myself, giving him the cover story of my newfound passion for history. He listened, his gaze unblinking. I needed to convince him this was genuine. Kael listened without interruption. Then he spoke. His words were few, but his questions were sharp, testing the depths of my interest. He saw through the surface. I almost smiled, posed a question. Not about general history, but a specific obscure detail regarding the Ashford family's land grants in the 15th century. His eyes widened. I had him. He rose, pulling a dusty tome from a precariously stacked pile. The archives, he murmured. They hold everything. He hadn't just agreed to help, he was eager. I left him to his archives. But not before mentioning a rumor of forgotten estate blueprints, hidden passages. He nodded, already lost in thought. The pieces were moving. Hale's gaze lingered on the ancient blueprints. I watched him, waiting for the flicker of recognition, the telltale sign of a hidden detail. He traced a line, a void in the design. I knew then that my gamble on the estate's forgotten past had paid off. The library was my first guess. I moved a specific book, and the shelf groaned to life, revealing its secret. A wave of stagnant air hit us. The tunnel was ancient, forgotten, perfectly suited for my purpose. It was more than just a passage, a vast chamber untouched for centuries. My new headquarters. I explained the potential, a hidden artery of information flowing right beneath their noses. Kael listened, captivated. My secure base was ready. It was time to activate my eyes and ears in the city. Serafina would deliver the message. Alara stood before me. Her first mission, gather whispers, market trends, anything that seemed trivial. Nothing is trivial. The Owies of Silverwood were her domain. She moved like a shadow, collecting threads of conversation unnoticed. She knew how to find the right ears. A friendly word, a small favor, and the city's pulse began to beat for me. Alara returned, a stack of trivialities in hand. She thought it was pointless. Serafina received the report. Wife, the grain prices in Drakon border towns. A tiny detail, but the smallest ripples betray the deepest currents. Serafina looked at the report again, her fingers tracing the numbers. Grain prices in Oakhaven, a distant border town, were unusually low. It felt like a loose thread, but I wondered what it truly connected. I walked in, my presence quiet. She looked up, the parchment still held loosely in her hand. Her expression told me the report contained more than just numbers. She handed me Alara's report. It detailed the low grain prices, but also whispered of minor nobles in the western provinces, restless and feeling overlooked. Two seemingly unconnected threads, just as I expected. Lysander and Thorn weren't making obvious moves. They were playing a different game, subtle and sneaky. Low grain prices meant a weakened economy, and discontented nobles were ripe for manipulation. It was a classic play. I pictured Lysander and Thorn, not openly plotting, but whispering in shadowed halls. Their faces smug with the belief that no one would notice their quiet manipulations. They thought they were invisible. They wanted to destabilize the kingdom, but without leaving fingerprints. Economic hardship in the West, combined with whispers of neglect, was the perfect storm. A slow burn, easily dismissed, but a slow burn could become a wildfire. My countermove was simple: provide the fuel. I would give the merchants a reason to blame the crown, turning their discontent into a weapon against Lysander and Thorn. I drafted the instructions for Alara. Subtle hints, carefully phrased rumors, amplifying existing fears about a royal tariff. It needed to sound like a possibility, not a certainty. That was the key to turning whispers into shouts. I folded the parchment, sealing it with a drop of wax. Serafina took it, her expression unwavering. She understood the weight of my words, the delicate dance of information. She was more than just an ally. Hours later, in the bustling back alleys of Silverwood, Alara received her new orders. She read them, her keen eyes scanning the precise instructions. A new game had begun, and she was already a piece in motion. Alara began her work. A casual conversation with a merchant here, a whispered warning there. The seed of a rumor, planted in fertile ground. Soon, the idea of a royal tariff would take root, then blossom into discontent. Back in my hidden chamber, I studied a map of the western provinces. Every man has a price, a fear, or an ambition. Find it, and their will becomes yours. Lysander and Thorn were about to discover that lesson the hard way. The faint smile on my lips held 1,000 calculations. Lysander and Thorn believed they were playing chess. I was designing the board itself. My instructions were precise. Serafina would know exactly how to find Alara, and more importantly, how to convey the urgency without a single spoken word. Alara knew the risks involved in meeting me. Every step she took towards my estate was a gamble, but she trusted the payout, or at least my judgment. She entered my hidden chamber with her usual caution, her eyes sweeping for threats. She found only me and the growing collection of maps and ledgers covering my table. I laid out the plan. Lysander and Thorn were manipulating grain prices, yes, but the public needed a different villain, a royal tariff. That was the story. Alara's brow furrowed. She understood manipulation, but this felt counterintuitive. Why deflect blame from the obvious villains to an invisible royal decree? I explained it plainly. Anger at a specific noble could be contained. Anger at the E-systems, at unseen tariffs, at general incompetence. That was a wildfire, untraceable, unstoppable. She didn't fully understand, but she didn't need to. Alara was a professional. She took my detailed instructions, a small nod confirming her acceptance, and vanished into the night. The rumors spread like wildfire. Days later, a low hum of discontent turned into frustrated shouts. Merchants, once cautious, now openly blamed the crown's new tariffs for their dwindling profits. Lysander and Thorn received their own reports. The discontent was real, but its direction confused them. New tariffs, Lysander scoffed. There are no new tariffs. Their own efforts to exploit the grain market were now met with suspicion. Merchants saw them as part of the incompetent crown, not as potential allies against it. My engineered weakness was turning their own strength against them. I received the update. The merchant guilds were in an uproar. Lysander and Thorn were scrambling. My first counter move was complete, and they had no idea I'd even touched the board. Lysander's jaw was still tight. The merchant guilds, those petty schemers, were supposed to be his pawns. Instead, they were a growing storm, turning on the crowd. Summoned Thorn, his voice tight. They spoke of tariffs, grain shortages, and the impossible whispers spreading through the city. No one could pinpoint the true cause. Meanwhile, General Theron watched the kingdom fray. Order was his bedrock, and this chaos felt like a slow, deliberate poison. He wouldn't stand for it. His aides presented reports, grain prices volatile, merchant protests growing, whispers of dissent from the western provinces, no single threat, no clear enemy, just rot. Theron's gaze drifted to the maps, landing on the western border, then on the prince's exiled estate. A prince once condemned, now strangely silent. The coincidence felt too neat. He needed answers, not from official channels, but from the shadows. A quiet order given with specific instructions: observe, report everything, be unseen. The agent nodded once, then melted into the deepening twilight. Theron's eyes followed the empty doorway, a silent promise to restore order. Days later, in my hidden chamber, Alara's latest report confirmed it. The chaos was spreading. The crown's authority, Lysander's supposed strength, crumbling from within. But then, a detail caught my eye. A pattern of activity around my own estate. Too regular, too precise for simple village life. A new variable on my board. Description was vague, a new face among the vendors, but the details of their movements, their quiet observation of the estate's perimeter, I knew what it meant. I moved through the hidden passages, a ghost in my own home. My eyes scanned the familiar grounds, searching for the unfamiliar, the out of place. And then I saw him. Among the bustling villagers, a face too sharp, too still. He was not a local. I was being watched directly. From the hidden passage, I watched the new face in the village, not a local. His eyes swept the estate with a practiced gaze, a professional. Theron's scrutiny had arrived. He lingered by the old mill, an idle merchant, but his eyes never truly rested. They tracked the estate's gates, the high walls. He wasn't looking for trouble, he was looking for me. My old self would have tried to expose him. But this Adrian knew better. Theron wasn't an enemy to crush, but a piece to move. I would show him exactly what I wanted him to see. My study became my stage. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, lending an air of undisturbed antiquity. I was the scholar, lost in ancient lore, precisely as Theron's man would expect. A flicker of movement outside. The agent, now positioned closer, caught a glimpse through the window. He saw a prince, harmlessly engrossed. My first hook landed. Later, I moved to the small walled garden, tending to herbs, a careful, quiet routine, my hands in the soil, my mind on the chessboard. The agent would be watching. He shifted. From the shadows of the old oak, he moved to the rose bushes, seeking a clearer view. Persistent. Good. The tighter his focus, the easier the deception. Master Kale joined me, excited about a newly discovered historical text. He spoke loudly for my benefit and for anyone who might be listening. An unwitting accomplice. The agent, still hidden, relayed his findings to another. Hushed words, a quick nod. Prince Adrian, they concluded, was utterly harmless, exactly as I intended. Back in my chamber, the hidden passage door clicked shut. I allowed myself a small smile. Theron's men had seen nothing. They had seen everything I wanted them to. In his office, Theron received the full report. Prince Adrian is engrossed in ancient texts, General, his aide stated, and his gardens flourish. The words were reassuring. But I knew Theron would feel something else. Here. Theron dismissed his aide. He walked to the window, staring out at the capital's distant lights. Oh, nothing suspicious, the report said, but a strategist like him would feel it. A subtle unease he couldn't quite place. General Theron stared at the all-clear reports on his desk. My agents confirmed nothing, they said. Yet, that feeling, it was still there, a whisper in his mind he couldn't silence. Knew that feeling. The instinct that something was wrong even without evidence. Theron was a capable man. It meant I needed to act before his intuition found its true target. My goal was simple. Provide Theron with a target, one that would make him feel his instincts were right. A minor noble, Lord Gareth, whose petty corruption could easily be exposed, would serve my purpose. The message to Seraphina was precise, detailing the information to be leaked and the method. She was the safest conduit, her innocence a cloak for my true intentions. Seraphina received the message the next morning. Her eyes, though worried, held that familiar spark of understanding. She knew the risks, and she never hesitated. I met Alora in a quiet corner of the artisans' district. No words were exchanged about the specifics, just a small, heavy pouch and a knowing glance. Alora understood. Alara moved through the market, a ghost in the crowd. She found the right informant, a known contact of Theron's agents, and accidentally dropped a coded slip of paper near him, then vanished. The informant, a man named Finn, picked up the slip. His eyes widened as he read the few coded words pointing towards Lord Gareth, a small, tantalizing piece of a larger puzzle. Hours later, one of Theron's agents confirmed the first part of the leak. Lord Gareth had, indeed, been quietly diverting tax revenue from the docks. A small but undeniable corruption. The agent reported back to Theron, the words crisp and clear. Lord Gareth, sir, it's true. The dock revenue has been skimmed. Theron's brow, once furrowed with vague unease, slowly smoothed. The general's instincts had been right after all. He hadn't been chasing ghosts. A clear mission, a tangible target. He barked orders, sending his agents to pursue Lord Gareth with renewed vigor. My chess piece had moved exactly as intended. Theron's attention was now firmly on Lord Gareth, a loyal ally of Duke Thorn, one less support for my enemy. The game continued. I watched the city from my hidden window. My smile faded, replaced by a cold logic. Theron was moving. The gears were turning. Theron's agents moved with precision. My information had given them a target. Now, they were closing in on Lord Gareth. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Lord Gareth exposed was a small victory, but every crack weakened Thorne's foundation. Lysander heard it from his advisors. Another ally fallen, another blow to his authority. He still couldn't see the hand guiding it all. Thorne didn't rage. He sat in silence, his eyes calculating. He knew he was under attack, but the enemy remained unseen. That was the real poison. A messenger arrived at my estate, disguised as a scholar. The confirmation of Darrett's downfall was brief but satisfying. Another piece moved. Hours later, Ilera arrived. Her usual brisk confidence was replaced by a subtle tension in her shoulders. Something was wrong. She didn't speak, just handed me a folded sheet of parchment. My eyes went to her face first. The news wasn't good. The parchment was brief. A name, a date, caught by Thorne's men during an unrelated task. A low-level informant, a casualty. I hadn't accounted for this. My chess pieces were not just pawns, they were lives. A cold wave of something unfamiliar washed over me. Regret, perhaps. Alara's voice was quiet. Thorne's men are more active now, my prince. They're searching. We have to be more careful. I nodded. The cost was real, but so was my goal. Thorne had teeth, but I had a game to finish, and now it was personal. The report lay open, the informant's name a stark reminder. I'd anticipated this move, planned for it, but seeing it on paper, the cost felt undeniably real. I knew the details of Thorne's interrogation chamber, a place designed to break spirits and extract secrets. This informant was walking into a nightmare. I could almost hear Thorne's voice, thick with satisfaction. He would believe this was his victory, the moment he finally uncovered my true intentions. These screams were a sound I could only imagine, but the words that followed were exactly what I'd planted. Small truths wrapped around a larger deception. He believed it, every word. The satisfaction must have tasted like wine. He thought he'd caught me meddling in the grain market, a minor distraction. True. He outlined his next steps, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. He was convinced I was merely dabbling in minor trade routes, a child playing with coins. Hours later, a coded message from Ilera confirmed it. The informant had broken, but the truth remained hidden. The deception held. Plan had worked. Thorne was misdirected, but the image of that informant, broken and afraid, lingered. This was not a game for pieces without consequence. Meanwhile, Thorne redirected his entire network. His focus shifted to the minor trade routes, chasing a phantom, while the true game unfolded elsewhere. My network was effective, but fragile. I needed a new way to gather information, one that didn't put a human life on the line every time I pulled a string. W-Force. The new system wouldn't be built on whispers and fear. It would be built on something colder, something faster, something that couldn't bleed. Thorne thought he had me cornered, chasing shadows. He didn't realize I was already building the unseen strings that would lead him to his true downfall. Thorne thought he had me figured out. He moved on, chasing ghosts I'd planted, but the price of those ghosts, it still sat heavy in my quiet study. A soft knock broke the silence. I hadn't expected anyone, especially not her. Not today, after the last report. She didn't waste time. Serafina's voice was low, but every word carried the weight of her fear. She said my game was becoming too dangerous. She spoke of Alara, of the informant, of the fear rippling through the network. She reminded me that these weren't just pieces on a board, they were people. She didn't yell, didn't accuse, just spoke with a quiet intensity that cut through my usual defenses. It was a familiar weight, the kind I knew from another life. She warned that even a perfect plan could break if the people holding it together snapped. She reminded me of my own fall, the one they called cowardice. I gave her the usual answer, that this was a war and sacrifices were inevitable. My words were ice, but I heard the echo of her warning. She knew it was useless. Her shoulders dropped, the fire in her eyes dimming. Serafina turned to leave, her silence louder than any argument. The door clicked shut. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence. Her words, like a stone dropped in still water, left ripples I couldn't ignore. She was right. The informant, Alara's fear, my current methods were too exposed. I needed a different strategy, something less reliant on human vulnerability. Answer wasn't in new faces, but old knowledge. Master KL. His dusty tomes held more than history, they held forgotten ways. I had to find another way. A path through shadows, guided by something older than any living memory. My conversation with Serafina had settled one thing. I needed a new kind of information. So, I turned to Master Kale, giving him a task unlike any other. His assignment was simple: find knowledge that couldn't be traced, that left no fingerprints, no whispers. But such things were rare, even in this ancient world. Past A's passed. Each sunset brought the memory of the informant's capture, the cost of human error. I needed KL to find a better way, and soon. Then, a week after I gave him the task, a single, forgotten name surfaced from the depths of KL's memory. A name whispered only in dusty texts. He presented it to me a few moments later, not a document, but a legend. A story of a hidden place, a collection of forgotten truths. Hence, he called it the Whispering Archive, a fabled collection of coded messages and encrypted ledgers maintained by ancient royal scholars, hidden somewhere in the palace, untraceable knowledge. A gold mine of historical and contemporary secrets. This wasn't just old lore, it was a new weapon, hidden in plain sight. My thoughts connected the pieces, forming a new strategy, but KL's next words brought me back to reality. The archive was hidden deep within the royal palace. S and Kabarisha number 1, Debad's royal part of the royal palace, inaccessible to a disgraced prince. KL saw a wall. I saw a lock, waiting for the right key. The royal palace. A symbol of power, a fortress of secrets, now home to Lysander and Thorn, and soon I would walk its hidden paths. Meanwhile, Lysander and Thorn discussed their petty squabbles. They had no idea what truly lay beneath their polished floors, or what I was about to uncover. The royal palace stood before me, a fortress of secrets, and somewhere inside, my next move waited. Palace schematics still glowed on my table. The Whispering Archive lay deep within its walls, a fortress of forgotten truths. I had to reach it. It was only one person I trusted with a task this dangerous. A knock at my study door, quiet, precise. Elara. I explained the target, the Whispering Archive. Untraceable knowledge, but hidden deep inside the royal palace itself. The risk was absolute. Elara's eyes, usually so steady, flickered to the schematic. She asked about the guards, the patrols, the very walls themselves. She didn't flinch, but she weighed every word. I told her I didn't need a direct assault. I needed eyes. Blind spots, service routes, the routines of every guard and steward. The palace had secrets, and I needed them all. Elara nodded. Her network was already vast, but the palace required a new kind of infiltration. She said she could build it, one whispered secret at a time. Days blurred. Elara worked in shadows, weaving threads through the palace's lower ranks. A scullery maid here, a stable hand there, small pieces building a larger picture. The first report was a list of names, not generals or dukes, but laundry staff and kitchen cooks. The unseen eyes and ears of the palace, now subtly loyal to her cause. The palace guards were everywhere, non-stop. Elara reported a close call, a patrol almost catching her near the western wing. The whispers had nearly been silenced, but Elara was non-stop. She found it, an ancient sewer grate, long forgotten, leading directly beneath the palace. A dangerous path, but an opening. She returned, a rolled map in her hand. The sewers, the patrol routes, the blind spots she'd found. Lysander and Thorn believed their fortress impenetrable. They were wrong. Elara revealed the palace would host a grand banquet in 3 days. Security would be diverted, focused on the public areas. And that was my chance. 3 days, a royal banquet. Elara's words carved out a precise timeline. The palace would be busy, distracted, my chance to act. Whispering Archive was my true goal. The distraction? Lord Renwick, a minor noble allied with Thorn, and a scandal just embarrassing enough to spread. Elara moved through the market crowd. A soft word here, a subtle gesture there. My lure was cast, waiting for the palace to react. The rumor spread as I expected. Lord Renwick, involved in some tawdry affair. Thorn's allies would be forced to acknowledge it. My sources confirmed it. The whispers were growing louder, drawing attention away from the palace's true vulnerabilities. Phase 1 was complete. The day of the banquet arrived. The palace hummed with anticipation, but a different kind of buzz was also growing. My distraction was taking hold. Lysander and Thorn, I knew, would be annoyed. A trivial scandal, yet one they couldn't ignore. They wouldn't see the true game afoot. My disguise was simple, functional. Elara, beside me, was a silent shadow. We were ready. The palace called, and its secrets would soon be mine. We moved through the city's underbelly, unnoticed by the revelers. Every shadow was an ally, every alley a path. My plan was in motion. Inside the palace, the feast was a spectacle. But the whispers about Lord Renwick were now loud enough to cause ripples. My bait was working. The ancient grate of the sewer entrance loomed. The stench was immediate, a grim welcome to the true path. No turning back now. We descended into the cold, damp darkness. Above, the music of the banquet faded. Below, my real game was just beginning. The water was colder than I expected, thick with the stench of forgotten things. Every step echoed in the dark, and the grate clanged shut behind us. Ilara moved ahead, her lamp barely cutting through the gloom. The air grew heavier, tasting of damp earth and something foul like dead things. She paused, consulting the rolled parchment. Left here, she whispered, pointing to a smaller passage. Her map was proving accurate, just as I planned. The passage narrowed, the stone slick and crumbling under our boots. A section above us looked ready to collapse, showering us with debris. My old life had no room for this kind of physical exertion. But the future of this one depended on every careful, painful step. I kept moving. Then the faint clang of metal, distant voices, a patrol. We froze, the sound amplified by the stone. They were coming. Alara pulled me into a small nook, barely enough space for two. We pressed ourselves against the wet stone, breath held. Every second felt like an hour. Legdies, the sounds grew louder, then slowly faded. They passed us by. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders, but the lesson of vigilance was clear. We moved faster now, deeper into tunnels that felt ancient, truly forgotten. The air grew stale, the water almost still. This was the palace's unseen underbelly. Alara stopped at a specific section of wall. Her map showed a hidden access point here. My planning, her intelligence, it had led us exactly where I wanted. With a soft click, a section of the wall slid inward. A dusty, forgotten corridor stretched before us, silent as a tomb. We were inside, but as we stepped inside, a faint blue shimmer pulsed across the passage. A ward, unforeseen. My game had just become much more complicated. The corridor was silent, but ahead, a shimmering, almost invisible barrier pulsed. A magical ward. This wasn't a lock I could pick with numbers. My old world had no magic. My instincts, my patterns, they meant nothing here. I needed to understand its weakness, and I needed to do it fast. Then, a new sound, faint at first, echoing through the distant passages. The rhythmic boots of a royal guard patrol. They were getting closer. I needed a specialist. Someone who spoke the language of ancient wards. Master Kael, he was my only option. I quickly relayed the ward's characteristics, the subtle energy fluctuations, the faint symbols I could just barely perceive. Ilara listened, her eyes tracking every detail. She took the message, a ghost in the shadows. Every second she was gone, the patrol drew nearer. My life depended on Kael's forgotten knowledge. Hours later, back at the estate, Kael received the coded scroll. His eyes, usually half closed, opened wide as he deciphered my croon sketches. He knew it. A rare ancient ward described in a forgotten text. Kael, with his vast knowledge, had already begun flipping through dusty pages, searching. He found it, the counter-charm, a precise set of instructions, a forgotten sequence of gestures and words. Kael immediately began preparing a response. Alara returned, a blur in the dim light. She handed me the scroll, her breath ragged. The patrol's boots were no longer distant, they were just around the bend. I tore open the scroll, relaying Kael's precise instructions to Alara. She moved like lightning, performing the gestures, speaking the ancient words. The ward shimmered, then vanished. We burst into the Whispering Archive, a vast chamber of forgotten knowledge. As I reached for an ancient tome, the entire palace trembled. Something new had begun. The shiver that had shaken the palace lingered, a low, unsettling growl. I reached for the ancient tome, ignoring Alara's nervous glance toward the ceiling. Ringcacias. The shiver subsided to a faint hum. I pulled the tome free. It wasn't just a book, it was a ledger, its pages filled with cryptic symbols, a pattern I recognized. This ledger was a key. It pointed to others, hidden deeper within the shelves. Alara called out, "Dust is falling, Adrian," more than before. I spread the documents across a dusty table. Lysander's forged decrees, Thorn's hidden ledgers. The sheer scale of their betrayal hit me. Not just me, but the kingdom. Years of embezzlement, disguised as royal expenditures. Manipulated decrees that lined their pockets while the people starved. Their greed was a sickness, eating the kingdom from within. I pulled out a small charcoal stick and parchment, working fast. Every name, every date, every manipulated figure, it was all here. The shivers were now a constant rumble beneath my feet. Alara's voice was sharp. "Adrian, a crack, right above us." I didn't look up. I copied a number, 430,000 gold. The exact sum skimmed from the royal granaries. The final ledger detailed their manipulation of the grain market, driving up prices for the poor, and the royal decrees, signed by a puppet king. This wasn't just greed, it was absolute control. Heavy groan echoed through the archive. The ceiling above us began to sag visibly. I had to prioritize the most damning evidence. Now, I finished the last line. The full scope of their corruption, copied. I looked up then, for the first time in minutes. The ceiling was tearing itself apart. There was no more time. The roar was deafening. A massive section of the ceiling gave way, sending a cascade of ancient stone and wood crashing down. Dust exploded, blinding me. I heard Alara cry out. The dust began to settle. I coughed, trying to move, but a heavy beam pinned me. Then, through the lingering haze, I heard it, the unmistakable clang of armored boots. They were here. Rubble pressed down on me, sharp and heavy. The guards were here. I heard their shouts, too close, through the dust and shifting stone. Alara was already digging at the rubble, her eyes wide with urgency. We need to move, Adrian. They're almost through the outer door. I ignored the pain, scanning the crumbling ceiling, the fractured walls. There had to be a weakness, a structural fault the shivers had created. Alara saw my focus. She reached into a hidden pouch, pulling out a small metal sphere. Emergency. For situations like this. My gaze snapped to the sphere, then to the wall. The shivers had created a critical point, a fragile section near the outer palace grounds. This changed everything. A loud cack echoed from the hidden entrance. The guards were actively breaching it now, splintering the ancient wood. We had moments, not minutes. I gave Alara precise instructions. The weakest point is 3 paces right, shoulder height. Embed it deep. We need maximum impact. Alara moved with practiced speed, embedding the sphere into the crumbling mortar. I pulled her down, shielding her just as the guards burst through the inner door. The world erupted, a deafening roaaaaaa, then a wave of heat and debris. Where the wall had been, now only a gaping hole remained, leading to the outside. I pulled Alara through the smoking breach. The banquet chaos was a perfect cover. We were out, and the evidence was secure. Then the alarms began. A piercing metallic wail that swept across the palace grounds, then the entire city. My presence was no longer a secret. Palace alarms blared across Silverwood, and Lysander's enraged voice echoed through the city. Prince Adrian Ashford is a traitor and an enemy of the crown. Bring him back, dead or alive. Lysander's voice still ripped through the air, screaming my name. There was no going back. We were exposed, and the entire palace was now our enemy. The first safe house was a cramped, forgotten space beneath an old tannery. It wouldn't last, but for a breath, we were shielded from the immediate chaos. This was the critical juncture. The evidence needed to spread, but not by my hand. Serafina was the only one subtle enough and trusted enough to set this in motion. I passed her the scroll and the pouch holding the copy ledgers. This task carried the most risk, but Alara's loyalty was absolute. She was my direct line to Serafina. Wasn't there, but I could picture Lysander perfectly. His face contorted with rage, giving the order that would unleash the full might of the royal army upon me. Theron would execute his orders without question, and so the trap was sprung. The royal army, the very instrument of Lysander's power, was now moving to my precise coordinates. Alara was gone. Now it was just me, a lone figure moving through the panicked city. Every shadow could hide a patrol, every sound a pursuer. I knew the message would find her. Serafina, in her quiet chambers, would receive the scroll. She would understand the urgency, the coded instructions, and the true weight of what it contained. Her task was simple: scatter the seeds of truth. Not a grand declaration, but a whisper to the right ears, a ledger page seen by the right eyes. The merchant guilds, the neutral nobles, they would all play their part. I finally reached the city's edge. Silverwood, a sprawling beast of stone and light, slowly receded behind me. The first phase was complete. Now for the final act. Then, in the distance, I saw them. Faint pinpricks of light growing steadily, moving with purpose. Theron's advance guard. They were coming, just as I had planned. I adjusted the stolen ledgers in my hand. They believed they were hunting a traitor. They were wrong. They were simply walking into my final, grand performance. The chill wind cut across the hill. Below, the torchlights of Theron's army were a slow-moving river of fire. My smile wasn't for them. It was for the game about to begin. This wasn't about fighting, it was about guiding. Every step I took now led them deeper into the snare, not towards me, but towards a truth they couldn't ignore. General Theron pushed his men hard. He believed he was hunting a traitor. He thought I was running. He couldn't have been more wrong. My agents were already working. Serafina moved through the capital circles, a whisper here, a folded document there. The seeds of truth were planted. The rumors began as whispers, then grew. A merchant reading a ledger felt the first shiver. The carefully constructed facade around Lysander and Thorn was cracking. Lysander dismissed the growing unrest as peasant gossip. Thorn, however, sensed a deeper current. His face tightened. He knew I was still playing. From my hidden perch, I watched Theron's vanguard. They were tired, focused on the chase, right where I wanted them. The old hunting lodge was just ahead. They breached the lodge. Not for me, but for shelter. And in doing so, they found the real quarry. A hidden compartment, exactly where I'd told Alara to plant the decoy. Theron picked up the ledger. The symbol on its cover, Thorn's family crest. Inside, it detailed illegal land acquisitions, the very ones Lysander had publicly cleared him of. The general's face went grim. His dilemma was clear: loyalty to the crown or justice for the kingdom. A man like Theron couldn't ignore what he'd seen. The move was complete. The general was now my piece. Back in Silverwood, the whispers became shouts. A prominent merchant guild, long loyal to the crown, publicly questioned Lysander's rule. The tide had truly turned. Theron stood alone in the lodge, the ledger still in his hand. The weight of Thorn's treachery pressed down on him. His oath to the crown had met its match, his own unwavering justice. What would he do now? The lodge went silent. Theron stood, proof in hand, the choice clear. Honor demanded action. He would not let this treachery stand. I watched from the shadows as Theron mounted his horse. My gambit had landed. Now, the pieces would move faster than they could ever anticipate. Lysander and Thorn, sensing their crumbling power, made their desperate play. They called an emergency session, hoping to silence dissent before it overwhelmed them. They spoke of stability, of loyalty, of a traitor prince. But the murmurs among the lesser nobles grew louder. My planted seeds were blooming. Then the doors burst open. Theron, covered in road dust, strode in. He carried no sword, but his presence was a weapon. He bypassed Lysander's protests. His voice, clear and unwavering, laid out Thorn's betrayal for all to hear. The room fell silent. That was my cue. I stepped into the chamber, not as a fugitive, but as the prince they had condemned. Every eye turned to me. Lysander's face drained of all color. Thorn stumbled back. My truth, meticulously gathered, left them nowhere to hide. The Grand Council's verdict was swift. Lysander and Thorn were stripped of their titles, their crimes laid bare. Justice, at last, was served. The crowd outside roared my name. My payback was complete. My enemies dismantled. They cheered for a hero, but I was simply a chess master. Back inside, a courier rushed towards me, a scroll in his hand. The seal was that of Drakon. My victory felt suddenly small. I broke the seal. The words confirmed it, a declaration of war. The court erupted in chaos. This was just the beginning.